was 4:22 on December the 4th. I just sat down in the car, about to turn the ignition on, and the call came in. I just remember this distressed voice just apologising, just saying, I'm sorry, it's Jordan, he's killed himself. And that was the moment that kind of changed my life. I wanted to know why. Why had my son chosen to end his life? I came to a conclusion very early on. Suicide was an illness of the mind. It was a mental illness. But as time went on, it was really clear that it was much more than that. More women actually attempt suicide, but the act and methods of suicide by men are typically more aggressive.
Welcome to the podcast, Death, a Changing Industry. Today with the great pleasure to welcome Phillip to tell his story. Really important conversation to have today around suicide prevention and to share your story and how we can provide help for people who might be listening who needs that support. So if you're comfortable to give a bit of background before we go into your story, if that's okay, please.
I remember it vividly. It was 4:22 on December the 4th. I just sat down in the car, put the phone in the holder, about to turn the ignition on, and the call came in. And I just remember this distressed voice just apologising, just saying, I'm sorry, it's Jordan, he's killed himself. And that was the moment that kind of changed my life completely and the life of our family and of course anyone that knew Jordan. Following Jordan's death, we had a lot of questions and I wanted to know why. So it was as simple as that, really. Why had my son chosen to end his life on that day back in December 2019? So I started to consume books. I started to speak to a lot of people, particularly people that had been impacted by suicide. But I came to a conclusion very early on through some of the material I was reading that suicide was an illness of the mind, and that was my position for probably several weeks, really. It was a mental illness, and others would support that viewpoint. But as time went on, it was really clear that it was much more than that. It was a combination of factors. They were sociological, they were biological, they were psychological. There were many different factors, and you couldn't really point to one particular reason why someone might take their own life. So within 8 months of Jordan's death, I founded the Jordan Legacy as a registered community interest company, a CIC. And our goal was to look at what could be done in a practical sense to prevent suicide. All the research, all the evidence tells us that suicide is one of the most preventable deaths in society. So what is it we need to do in order to reach that point? And that's very much where the Jordan Legacy began. Yeah, and because we've spoken on previous podcasts, most recently with Scott Munn as well, about the work he's doing in Scotland with support groups there to try and tackle the stigma and to help people to start to talk about where they're at and even just to listen. So what do you think then is causing this decline in mental fitness? What is the root of that, do you think? Again, it's really complex. I say it's all this combination of factors. But if we look at the fact that we've had a number of things impact us over the last 16 to 20 years, I would say. So if we understand that from the 1980s, we saw a period of steady decline in suicide numbers in the UK. We reached a point in around about 2007, 2008, where we had the most recent financial collapse, really, globally, and recession. We know in periods of recession, particularly, suicide numbers will increase. But you can look at the data from the Office for National Statistics and see that at that period, we saw a peak. We saw suicide numbers increase. What we didn't see after that, as we came out of that recession, were the numbers starting to decline again. And in fact, they have continued for over 16 years to increase. Yeah. And more recently, the data for 2022 to 23 now shows a spike and a 7% increase on average in suicide deaths. Yeah. So when we look at what are the reasons and look at what has developed during that time, we've had financial challenges without question. We've had most recently the cost of living crisis putting a huge amount of pressure on people. We've had the growth of social media and the concerns around digital online behaviours and just pressures of life. And I think more than ever, particularly around social media, I would say, and this need to be seen in a certain way and behave in a certain way. We've seen a huge amount of pressure put on young people. We're also seeing a generational thing that's changed, where more older parents are having to kind of hang on to their wealth more. They're not able to pass it on to their children as they did before. So we're now seeing people reaching their 30s, 40s, not having the finances behind them, sometimes not even being able to buy a house, potentially. And they're questioning, is this what it's about? Have I made the right decisions in life? And I know Jordan was questioning those, because we've seen that from some of the journals he's written. He was asking those same questions. So I think we've seen a combination of factors and a combination of societal pressures that have built over the last 16 to 20 years that are causing people to really feel quite trapped in certain situations. And if that entrapment then leads to any kind of sense of hopelessness, that's where the decision comes to maybe end their life.
To feel like there's no other way to tackle things, really. There's no other answer. And the numbers around this, and we spoke about this beforehand, so the statistics state that 6,000 people in the UK every year die by suicides, but you mentioned to me that might be actually not correct.
I think there's a couple of things to consider here, John. One is now that the data and the recent increases are suggesting that figure is now, the recorded figure is greater than 7,000 a year. So that's men, women and children. We lose approximately 200 school children every year to suicide.
School children?
School children. Now, so we're looking at date of registration of death from 10 years old and upwards, but I know of children younger than 10 that have taken their own lives. And one of the issues, therefore, is the recording of suicides. And because the recording of suicides relies on the coronial process, a recent study by the charity Calm has suggested that, in fact, that figure of 6,000 or 7,000 is much more likely to be closer to 13,000, 14,000 deaths.
Double the amount.
We mentioned stigma a little earlier, and we say, well, why is it that there's this discrepancy between what certain charities believe is the actual number and the recorded number of suicides through the coronial process? And some of that is exactly the pressure that coroners are put under at times to record a certain cause of death, where families particularly do not under any circumstances want it to be recorded as a suicide. So it could be a misadventure or any other form of death. Accidents. We know certain deaths in road traffic accidents that pretty well everyone is certain within the family that it was a deliberate act on behalf of that person. But of course it may well be recorded as an accidental death, road traffic accident. So I think the numbers already are terrifying, really, to say that we lose more than 120 people every week to suicide. But if it's that vastly underreported, what are we actually dealing with?
I just feel like we're letting society down, aren't we? We're not doing enough. Like, why? So the question is, why is there a stigma around suicide? Why is that there? Is that religious? Is that historic? Like, what is the cause of that? Why are coroners trying to support families by changing that title to something else? Why are we in that position?
Again, it's multifaceted. There's a lot of reasons for the stigma. Some of it is the whole issues of how someone with a mental health illness is perceived, first of all, and that could be propagated by TV dramas, movies that we've watched, where certain stereotypes have been formed. For instance, that someone with a mental health illness is considered dangerous, perhaps in the first instance, and then when we hear news reports of somebody, any of the atrocities we might hear on the news, there seems to be an almost tagging, well, that person had bipolar or they had some kind of mental health illness.
Okay.
So understandably, individuals and possibly after a death by suicide, families do not want to have that kind of stigmatization of their loved one or themselves. So they'll kind of shy away from being open about what the reasons were. It is cultural. We know there are many cultures still. There are more than 30 or 40 countries globally where suicide is still considered illegal in that country. And within religious communities, it's absolutely frowned upon as a cardinal sin to end your own life or to attempt to end your own life. For many, it's this sense, particularly with men. We know that 75% of all suicide deaths are male. interestingly, more women actually attempt suicide and experience depression.
Yeah.
But the act and methods of suicide by men are typically more aggressive, historically have been at least. But it's this sense, particularly in the male side of things, that they have to be seen as strong.
Yeah.
So again, they won't open up and talk about the fact they're feeling suicidal. Just this week I was delivering a webinar to Northumbria Police Force, and it was around men's mental health. And I've done quite a lot of work with the police forces, and there is certainly this need, if you're in uniform, to appear strong and be this persona.
Yeah.
And part of that talk was to try and break that down a little bit and say, look, it is okay to kind of be in touch with your feelings, to open up and have that conversation. The language we use around suicide as well, I think, can be very stigmatizing. So we've used, and for many years I grew up using the term commit suicide.
Yeah.
We still hear it occasionally in the media,
Yeah.
less so now, but in films, and certainly of a certain age, perhaps we'll hear it. And I remember having a conversation with somebody not long after Jordan's death when I'd used the term commit suicide. And someone said to me, Steve, you know that suicide is not illegal in this country anymore. I said, well, yeah, I was pretty certain of that. And in fact, what I didn't know, as I was told, was that it was 1961 when suicide was decriminalised in this country. So I asked the question, why is that important in terms of using the word commit suicide? And the response was, well, if we use commit suicide in the same way we use commit robbery, commit murder, commit rape, commit any crime, we're still using that kind of illegality, if you like, around suicide, which can be very distressing, particularly for those that are bereaved by suicide. And that's why terms such as the person died by suicide or they took their own life is now preferred. So there's lots of things that can create stigma around this topic.
But even the changing of the words to remove the word commit, I suppose this is how we change the culture. So that there are steps forwards, but I suppose the next step really is how do we prevent, what can we do more to try and help people who find themselves in this dark place? I mean, what methods and tactics and suggestions do you have for people?
Yeah, it's going to need a combination of factors. It's going to need a better educated and activated general public, first of all, that we need to be aware, as much as we're being trained to use defibrillators and other methods for physical illnesses, we need a better understanding. Families need a better understanding. Schools need a better understanding. Workplaces need to know what are the signs that I'm looking for, what are the risks that we may lose a child to suicide at school, or we may lose an employee, or I may lose a family member. What is it I'm looking for? So we need more education. I think other things we need to consider is that there are many pieces to this jigsaw. As the Jordan Legacy, we published a report called Moving Towards a Zero Suicide Society in July of 23. And just to caveat that for a moment, the term zero suicide is one that gets a lot of pushback. So automatically people assume it's a target and a goal to eradicate any possible suicide. Now we know that's unrealistic, but again, coming back to the research that says that most suicides are preventable, if we have to aim for a goal, then surely that goal has to be zero, because anything less than that smacks of a lack of ambition, really. So we have to do more in our workplaces, we have to do more in our schools, we have to do more around our technology. It goes beyond that. You then look at the whole culture of government around suicide. We have we've not had a suicide prevention minister as such since the days of Theresa May being in government. So it's not focused on by government as a key area. It fits within the wider strategy. We need more safe spaces within our communities for people to go to be able to talk and open up. We're seeing Andy's Man Club and we're seeing other organisations out there doing a great job, but it needs more of this. But it definitely needs better government backing, which it's not getting at the moment.
I do agree about the government, and with government, it's been so inconsistent the last couple of years. It's hard to get anything moving forward in a positive way. It's always been held back. Something of great interest to me, Scott Munn, who came on the podcast recently, and he does the one in Scotland, the group for men with issues. I asked him about a similar question, and he suggested to me as well, rather than just saying, "Hi John, how are you?" and "Things okay." The question was, if someone looks like a bit tired or worn out or a bit stressed, like, how are you sleeping at the moment? How's your sleep? And he said that question, it can really open people up. So it's about, and it's showing the intent as well. Like saying, how are you? can also just be like a hello. How much depth is there behind that? I suppose that's the cultural shift we need as well. It's like, do we actually mean, how are you? And that question, I thought it was wonderful, how you can actually tap into somebody at it's up their choice again, how much they give, but it can really open people up. And it shows them there is an intent, people do care.
Yeah, and I think you can be really specific like that and ask about sleep. I think there are great ways, because they're not, you can't get a yes or no answer to that question. It's really important. I use a very similar approach again with the talks that I delivered, that it's too easy for us, even if we are concerned about someone, to go up to that person and say, how are you? How are you doing? And if that person smiles back and says, I'm fine, there's a great sigh of relief internally on our part. Go, well, that's a relief. And we all get on with our day. But we still have those concerns, otherwise we probably wouldn't have answered the question. But I think it's about asking that question twice.
Yeah.
And the second way of asking it has to have a completely different intonation.
Yeah.
And it could be, okay, John, look, how are you really doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just allow that space and that silence. And if you deliver it in that slightly different way and say, okay, but how are you really doing? You're more likely to get a response back.
Hey guys, thank you for watching the video so far. I hope you're really enjoying it. Please click the thumbs up on the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, a huge thank you to our sponsors. Their details are found in the video description just below. Thank you so much. And with the communication as well, which is so important, what communication did you see at the time of Jordan taking his life? Did you see any triggers, or was there anything that you picked up on latter, looking back?
I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, John, that my knowledge and understanding of mental health was minimal. I knew nothing. I look back on that and say, as a parent, even though I had an adult child, he was 34, should I have known more? Should I have made an effort to know more about anxiety and depression and what was involved? I think the answer to that question is probably yes. But I was busy. I was a busy consultant. Everyone will say I'm busy in life, and as long as our kids or our husband or wife or whoever it might be tells us they're doing okay, and as long as we're there for them, we go for a beer and do, that's enough, isn't it? Yeah. But I don't think it is.
That's normal.
That's normal, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think if you've got someone in your family or close to you that's been diagnosed with a mental health illness, I think it's incumbent upon you to find out a little bit more. So that's the first thing. I look back. And it's not about regret or if onlys. It is about understanding that the toolkit that I had at the time was really poor.
Yeah.
I've got a much better toolkit now that allows me to help others, but of course it doesn't allow me to help Jordan. So if we look at the signs, what were the signs? At the time, there were signs that I know now were clearly red flags. Mm-hmm. But back then, I didn't recognise them or understand they were red flags. So I'll give you an example. There was more than one occasion where Jordan talked about his lack of sleep. We know now, and I know now, that a severe lack of sleep is one of the biggest red flags and triggers to look out for. In fact, Jordan and I had a WhatsApp exchange the night before he took his own life, as I'd arrived in Solihull, in fact, for the next day's work. And we were going to have a chat on the phone, and I messaged him. I was a little late getting to the hotel. I was going to go downstairs for a beer and a bite to eat. I said, would you like to have a chat later? And he said, it sounds like you've had a long day, Dad, but don't worry. He said, to be honest, I've not been sleeping well. It was 2:00 last night. He said, I think I'm just going to go to bed early and chill, and maybe we can chat later in the week. And that wasn't the first time he told me that he'd been struggling with his sleep. Yeah. So my response, essentially was, okay, Jordan, no, that's fine. Hope you have a good night. Now, I've looked back at this many times and said, what would I do differently now with the knowledge that I have? If I now knew this was the 5th, 6th time of struggling to sleep, I'd be on the phone to him or replying to him and saying, George, look, when I get back, let's get together. You're only 20 minutes from me. Put the kettle on. Let's have a cup of coffee. Let's see what's going on for you. Yeah. Because there were signs. Other signs, changes in behaviour and attitude. Jordan could, generally, through his life, be quite a sensitive person, and there were certain triggers we knew might push the buttons. But I remember an instance just some weeks before his death. We were out for a meal with Charlotte and with Jordan's stepmum, my wife, and I can't remember specifically the conversation, but I do remember the reaction, this very almost confrontational reaction from Jordan, a very intense reaction, completely out of character. But we didn't follow up with that.
Yeah.
I remember going home and saying, well, that was odd. That wasn't like Jordan. But it wasn't anything that made me at the time decide I should pick up the phone and have a chat with him and say, look, what was that all? What's going on for you? What was that all about last night? But as you put all the pieces together, afterwards you can see patterns and changes of behaviour, emotional responses, behaviour, just the way he was not looking after himself physically in those latter days. Albeit we didn't see him every day, of course, because he gone on with his life. So there were signs. The most telling signs were, though, in a journal or journals that Jordan had written during the 4 or 5 years leading up to his death, that we found in the attic when we were clearing his house. And there was really tales of how disgruntled he was with himself, disappointed with himself in terms of relationships that he's had, in terms of decisions to buy houses, in terms of career moves. It was all kind of laid out, really. Yeah. And you think, wow, if you'd been able to talk about that, everything was going on there, rather than just write it down in a book, could someone have helped him?
It was all there.
Through
it was all there.
It was all there.
But in a closed book.
Yeah.
Just so obviously your communication skills are very strong. Again, professionally, you've got that experience as well. For families or individuals that don't have that communication tool set, what can they do to sort of, if they see these triggers and watching this and think, I need to act, but I'm not capable of acting, what can they do?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is that we, as human beings, and particularly males, I would say, we have this inherent desire that if something looks broken, we want to go in and fix it.
Yeah.
As a parent, we also want to do the same thing. And I think one of the challenges is this isn't something we can just fix, particularly if we don't have the skills or the tools to do that. But one of the things we can do is be there for somebody and listen. And I think that's really important. So one of the things I'd say is you don't need to go on a course. You don't need to learn a whole raft of questions. But if you are seeing signs in whoever it may be that are giving you cause for concern, then ask them, approach them. I think that's really important. And be very specific about what you've seen. So I'm going back to that experience in the restaurant or the lack of sleep, for example. And it might be just something simple along the lines of, John, look, just noticed that you're drinking a lot more than I've noticed before. In fact, look, the recycling bins, come around your house, it's kind of overflowing at the moment. You've told me that you've not been sleeping well for the last couple of weeks now. And anything that you see that you can kind of lay evidence to, if you like, so it's not open to any misinterpretation. Just say, look, this is what I've noticed. Just tell me what's going on for you, just so I can understand. Just explain to me what's happening. But the most important thing to do then is listen.
Yeah.
Allow that person to talk, even if you have to sit in a bit of uncomfortable silence. But I think just say, look, this is what I've observed.
Yeah.
It's given me a cause for concern. Just tell me what's going on for you. Because if you say, are you all right, or anything like that, they're going to say yes.
Yeah.
So just tell me what's going on.
And you're bringing it forward based on something that you've seen.
Yeah.
So like it's not just like out of thin air. There is a reason why you're bringing it forward to that person.
Because if you were just to go in and say, I want to have a conversation with you, John, because I'm concerned about you.
Yeah.
Well, what are you concerned?
Yeah.
About? Well, I'm just concerned. No, I'm fine. And you're kind of going nowhere with that conversation, but kind of presenting the facts, if you like, as you've seen them. And it could be that everything is fine, they're just going through a bad period, but I think that's really important.
No, that's great advice, and I think that will help people knowing how to approach this stuff. Regarding support that you received at that time when Jordan died, was there much around you and your family? Was there many support groups you could go to?
Gosh, well, apparently yes. And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I remember publishing an article on LinkedIn within 3 weeks of Jordan's death. And the reason why I did that, my background was in social media training and consultancy. And I had a reasonably decent following on LinkedIn. And by publishing this article, it was a way of me kind of releasing all that was the confusion and everything that was going on so soon after the fact. And I published it to do two things. One, to say, look, are we the only people going through this? And having all this experience with the police and the coroners and all that. And also to reach people that were maybe considering doing the same, to say, look, this is the absolute horror you're going to leave behind here. And that brought a lot of responses out, and that opened the doors to one or two support organisations. But up until that point, there was no support. So, for instance, there was no liaison with the police, only with the coroner's office to talk about the inquest process and what would go on there. So we had no connection. Many people are shocked to learn that that I wasn't even given a contact for the police after Jordan's death, and had to spend the first 24 hours driving around police stations in West Yorkshire,
wow,
looking to find out where Jordan had gone,
wow,
where they'd taken him. I mean, quite mind-boggling. So we had very little support in terms of signposting at all. We had to find it out for ourselves.
And why is that? Is that because it was just bad luck? It wasn't given to you? Was it because it wasn't there? What was the reason for that?
Support is out there. There are many amazing organisations out there, John, doing great work, but it's very disjointed, it's very fragmented. Within the North Yorkshire Police Force, we automatically handed out this guide to bereaved families. But Jordan died in West Yorkshire, literally a mile or two kind of into the border, where they don't hand that out. And it's that simple, thing of that guide that,
means so
could
much.
have helped us enormously in dealing with some of the things that we were going through. There's a great organisation run by Sam Southern in Blackpool, and that is the Empowerment Charity. And they're doing a lot of work with local councils in the Blackpool area, where if somebody dies by suicide, they automatically send someone out now to the families. This is happening with other organisations in the northeast of the country at the moment as well. And you think, and these are generally people with lived experience.
Yes.
At least one of them that will go out. And you think, well, surely that should happen everywhere,
yeah,
shouldn't it? But it doesn't, because there isn't the funding to put it on formally through councils. So it's down to individual charities and organisations that are under-resourced, underfunded, and
inconsistent as well.
Inconsistent in terms of what is available out there.
So you've talked about lived experience, which I think is one of the most powerful methods of communication and like mentoring and like support. For people who are watching or listening to this podcast and who have recently suffered the loss of a child or a loved one, what advice would you give them at this moment in time, if it is still quite new for them?
Yes, I don't think I can give advice as such, because the experience will be unique. But there is one common theme that I come back to. As time goes by, it won't become easy, but it will become easier for all kinds of reasons. But that's also down to your circumstances, support, various other factors. The one thing I can say is that if you can find a sense of purpose, that is massive. It doesn't have to be going out to set up a charity or delivering talks. For some people, a sense of purpose might be, I've been sitting in bed for the last 6 months because I just cannot face the world. Today, get up and go to the bathroom. Tomorrow, go downstairs and make a cup of tea. Just have something, go to the shops. Just make sure you've got some sense of purpose to keep you moving forward one step at a time. And that, above anything else, I think is really, really important.
Small steps forward.
Yeah, just whatever's right for you. But if you have no sense of purpose, then you will become consumed by what's happened. And one of the sad statistics we know is that those who've been bereaved by suicide are at a 63% increased risk of attempting to take their own life.
Wow.
So those are the people that definitely need support.
Yeah. We talk a lot on this podcast about how when someone dies, you still take that person with you moving forward into your life. Are there things that you do now? Obviously, you've set up a charity in his name, which is a big method to keep somebody moving forward with you. Are there other things that you do or with your family to take Jordan with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we gather each anniversary as a family together, and on Jordan's birthday, which is in the summer, it coincides with Jordan's sister's youngest lad, my grandson. His birthday is on the same day. Dylan. So that's Samuel, actually, the youngest one. Yeah, Dylan is our oldest, my oldest grandson. So we have those kind of understandable anniversary gatherings. But there's some very simple things that I do, and I smile because my wife kind of knows this ritual that I have. But in my office at home, we have framed photographs. So there's about a dozen photographs of a trip Jordan and I took to Italy. He wasn't in a good place at that time. It was his 30th birthday coming up, and I just said, look, I'm going to book this trip. Why don't we go? Just the two of us. Now, I understand from his mum, who divorced from him in 2005, he wasn't looking forward to it, the trip at all. He told her that. But we went, and subsequently came back and said it was the best trip he'd been on. We had just a great time. Now, those photographs sit in a multi-photograph frame on a bookcase behind my desk. My ritual pretty well since Jordan's death has been every morning when I go in my office, I talk to him about what's happening. I told him about coming today, what we were going to be doing. And every night before I go to bed, I talk about the day and what's going on. And my wife knows when we're all finishing up before going up to bed, she's got to clear off and get upstairs out of the way. You know, she had to put up with this for 5 years now, but it's kind of my ritual. And it might sound a very odd thing to say because I'm not a particularly spiritual person, not a religious person in any way, shape or form. But by having that daily conversation at the beginning and at the end of the day, it has kind of kept Jordan, inverted commas, alive there and kept him part of the process. And I think maybe that comes through in the work we do, because I've had so many people through what we share online over the years say, I feel like I know Jordan. Through what you're writing. It's not just about the suicide prevention work. We've got to know Jordan, and they see him as part of this movement, which if we've achieved that is quite incredible. But it's because I am so heavily invested in that, I suppose.
And that's the thing, he's connected, and that's what you're connecting to him with, like what you're doing, your rituals. But then, like you say, he's connected to the charity, and people like myself feel like I know him as well. Even his sort of attributes as a person from like reading and learning about him. So yeah, he's very much part of it all. My question was as well, when you received that phone call from Charlotte, and from that phone call you received through to time, making things easier, do you ever revisit that level of pain? Or is that dissipated now as time has moved forward?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So the pain and the trauma is dissipated for sure, because I know there were several months of what I probably understand, although not formally diagnosed, where I suffered symptoms of PTSD. So that would manifest itself in violent head twitches. I could just be sitting on the sofa and the head would literally just turn from one side to another, or I could be washing up in the kitchen and it was as if someone had just punched me in the midriff, and I'd be physically knocked backwards. And there were times where I can remember my wife holding me down in bed as I was shaking so violently, and these were clearly symptoms of PTSD. Now, those have eased considerably now. There are moments where under stress, some of those symptoms do come back. But one of the things that some people listening to this might find a little odd, I deliberately go back and revisit some of that pain through the journals that I was writing at that time. I don't write them now, but in the first year or two, I was documenting kind of each day and most days what was going on through the process. And I do that so that I don't lose complete touch with what we went through. And I think that's important, maybe because of the work that I'm doing now. You know, I delivered the talk just the other day to Northumbria Police online, and invariably I get through the talks I deliver okay. There is often almost one moment at least where I'll have a wobble, and it happened towards the end of that presentation with a photograph of Jordan on the screen, and just talking about hope at the end. And I think if I ever lose that emotional connection with the work that I'm doing, that's the time to stop. Because as many police officers said to me, they often become desensitized by what they experience. I think for people working in suicide prevention, it's very easy because of the volume of conversations you're having around this topic to be one more person who's kind of lost somebody who wants to speak to me. I have caught myself, as bad as that sounds, as awful as that sounds, going, oh gosh, I'm not sure I've got time, and then suddenly just bring myself back and say, of course I've got time. But the moment that starts to happen, I think you have to reassess what you're doing, and have you become almost desensitized to what's happening.
Why you're doing it, isn't it? It's the whole why.
I don't think I ever lose track of why I'm doing it, but it's just that if it becomes a job now rather than the vocation that it has to be for me, then I have to question, am I doing it for the right reasons now, or do I need to step away from it?
My sort of final question for you really is about the future of the charity. Obviously what you just said there, you'll keep revisiting, exploring. What do you see the future of the charity being? Where do you want to see it go?
Well, one big initiative we're working on at the moment, which started this year, which follows on from the report I mentioned earlier, is to try and create a framework where all those working in suicide prevention, particularly grassroots, can come together and work collaboratively. I think this is the biggest shift we have to see for all kinds of reasons. Many of these organisations, as well meaning as they are, they're doing great work, but they're having to operate in silos, usually under huge amounts of pressure and under-resourced and getting burnt out in the process. And yet many of them are dealing with similar areas of suicide prevention. So the framework for something we've called One Voice, One Hope is being formed at the moment. I see this as at least the next 5 years of the Jordan Legacy's development, is to say, can we create a collaborative movement, a national network community, if you like, with central resources and central hubs where we can start to share what is working, what is making the difference, because so many good things are making a difference, but it's patchy. And people don't know it exists. So we want to create this centralized network community where we can get and encourage people to share their resources. Everyone says they want this. Everyone says they want to see this happen, and it can happen. We have absolute hope that it can happen. One of the things we have to get over, I suppose, is the fact that there are a lot of egos out there in the charity work, which surprised me. People who are very precious about their own particular charity and their own work that they're doing, and sometimes that's because it's very, very personal, which I get, but some of the larger charities, generally due to funding issues, can be very protective. We have to break down those barriers. We have to be more willing to share and be more open.
I've seen this with bereavement awareness in the curriculum. I've noticed that there's been a few organisations that get very concerned about being left behind, and I'm saying it's not about that. There's a bigger piece. This is about changing societies as a whole in a better way. So this isn't personal. This isn't about one person. It can't be. So yeah, I wish you well with that. I believe you can do it. How did organisations get in touch with you to be part of this?
Yeah, at the moment, it's more of a vision than an actual formal framework. We're going through the process of framework building with around about 25, 30 other advocates working in suicide prevention. Some I've mentioned, like the Three Dads and others at the moment. So we're in the process of trying to create this framework and this structure. But certainly, if anyone's interested at all, go to the website, thejordanlegacy.com, the Contact Us page. Just get in touch with us there. That all comes through to me or Danielle, my daughter, that works closely with me on the website and our social media. So we'll pick that up, and we'll do our best to respond. We get a huge number of messages, and we're a tiny organisation, but we make a point of replying to everyone.
No, brilliant. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming down to meet us and to talk about your story, your life, and Jordan. And despite all the sadness and pain around that, hopefully we can help, and you're helping numerous people in the work that you're doing. So just a huge thank you.
Good, thank you, John. Appreciate the invitation.
Thanks, Steve.